The war had ended, but the stars still looked wounded. Broken ships floated in the void like ghosts, their metal bodies twisted and silent. Once the Zerkai Empire had ruled half the galaxy with pride and power. Now its worlds were nothing but ashes and ruins. The humans had won, but no one was cheering. There was no victory, only quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after too much pain. Queen Alara of the Zerkai stood at the edge of her shattered palace. Her silver crown bent and scorched from the fires that had burned across her homeworld. The wind carried the scent of smoke and old blood. Her heart ached with every breath. The sky that once glowed with her people's banners was now filled with the wreckage of war. She had lost everything, her armies, her cities, and the voices that once called her Mother of Light. But the worst loss was her children. 3 small hatchlings who had never learned to fly, gone in a single human bombing run. Alara's claws trembled as she touched the broken wall beside her. The stones were cold, rough, and empty, just like her heart. For weeks she had tried to find peace, to understand the madness that had swallowed the galaxy. But the same question kept echoing inside her mind like a scream she could not silence. Why? Why had humans fought so hard? Why had they chosen destruction over mercy? Why had they burned worlds that could have been friends? Her advisors had no answer. Her priests spoke of destiny, of punishment from the stars. Her generals blamed human greed. But none of those words satisfied her. None of them explained why the humans had fought with such desperation, why they had refused to stop even when victory meant their own pain. So the queen made a decision that shocked everyone. She called for a human. Not a commander, not a diplomat, not a soldier. She demanded to meet an ordinary human, someone who had lived through the war, someone who could tell her the truth from his heart, not from his rank. The request spread across the human colonies like wildfire. Some mocked it. Some feared it. The Zerkai were still seen as monsters and few dared to approach their queen. But one man volunteered. His name was Elias Carter, a simple maintenance worker from a ruined human mining colony. He wasn't a hero nor a scholar. He had repaired ships, scrubbed engines, and buried friends. When asked why he volunteered, he only said, "Someone needs to answer her." When Elias arrived at the Zerkai capital, the air felt heavy, as if even the wind was afraid. Alien eyes watched him as he walked through the palace gates, tall guards with black scales and glowing eyes, their armor cracked from battle but their posture still proud. The grand hall was silent as he entered, footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. At the end of the hall sat Queen Alara, her silver armor dull from age and grief. She looked at him, small, fragile, human, and for a moment she felt the rage she had tried to bury rise again. This single creature, soft-skinned and mortal, belonged to the species that had destroyed her world. Elias stopped a few feet away and looked up at her. His eyes were tired, not from fear, but from life itself. He didn't bow, didn't kneel, just stood there with quiet respect. The queen's voice was cold but trembling. "Human," she said, her tone carrying both command and sorrow. "You have been sent to speak for your kind. Tell me, why did your people do this? Why did they burn our skies? Why could they not stop?" For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The silence stretched until even the guards shifted uneasily. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "Because we were afraid." Alara blinked. "Afraid?" "Yes," he said. "We fight because we fear losing what little we have. We destroy because we don't know how to let go. Sometimes fear is the only thing that keeps us moving, even when it turns us into monsters." The queen's golden eyes narrowed. "You kill out of fear?" Elias looked down. "Yes, and we also love out of fear. We love because we know one day we'll lose what we have. It's our weakness, but also our strength." For the first time since the war ended, Queen Alara didn't know what to say. She had expected hatred, excuses, maybe even pride, but not this. Not a confession that sounded so painfully human it almost broke her heart. The queen leaned back, her claws tapping the side of her throne. "You speak like one who has lost much," she whispered. Elias looked up, his voice trembling. "We all have." And in that vast broken hall, surrounded by the ruins of war, an alien queen and a human worker stared at each other, both carrying the same unbearable truth that in the end, pain didn't care what world you came from. The next morning, the palace felt different. The guards still stood at their posts. The walls still glowed faintly with the soft blue light of alien crystals. But there was a quiet tension in the air. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen between the queen and the strange human. Elias Carter was taken to the grand audience chamber again, though this time there were fewer soldiers around. Queen Alara had dismissed most of them. She said she wanted no witnesses, not for interrogation, but for understanding. When Elias stepped inside, he found her standing near the giant window that overlooked the ruined city below. The once glorious capital of the Zherkai Empire now looked like a scar across the planet. Smoke still rose from shattered towers, and the great silver spires had fallen like broken spears. The queen turned as she heard his footsteps. Her golden eyes were softer now, less like a predator's and more like a tired soul searching for something she couldn't name. "Human," she said, her voice calm this time. "Elias Carter, you spoke of fear yesterday. Tell me, does your kind fear peace as much as war?" Elias took a slow breath. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Peace feels strange to us. We never trust it to last. We build it with one hand and prepare to defend it with the other." The queen tilted her head. "Strange. For us, peace was a wound. It meant weakness. We were born for strength, for conquest. When we stopped fighting, we stopped feeling alive." Elias frowned. "Then maybe that's what destroyed us both. You feared stillness, and we feared losing control." Alara walked closer, her long robes brushing against the cracked floor. She studied him, this fragile creature who dared to speak to her as an equal. He was not beautiful, not powerful, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet fire that even she, the queen of 1,000 worlds, could not ignore. "You speak as if you carry the guilt of the war," she said slowly. "Were you a soldier?" Elias shook his head. "No, I fixed things, and engines, hulls, anything that broke. During the war I worked on ships that bombed your worlds. I didn't press the button, but I built what they used to destroy." The queen's wings twitched slightly, a gesture of controlled anger. "Then why are you here knowing what your hands helped create?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because if I helped make the damage, then I should help make it right." For a moment, silence filled the room again. The queen's expression changed. Confusion, sorrow, maybe even respect flickered in her eyes. Few of her own people had ever spoken such words. To accept fault was a weakness in Zherkai culture, but in this human's voice it sounded like strength. She turned away, looking once more at the broken horizon. "My people used to believe the universe owed us obedience. We took what we wanted and called it destiny. When your species resisted, we thought it was defiance. Now, I see it was survival." Elias stepped closer, careful but firm. "Survival makes monsters out of all of us," he said quietly. "But it also gives us a chance to change, if we let ourselves." Alara looked over her shoulder, her golden eyes locking on his. "You think change can heal what was done?" He didn't hesitate. "No, but it can stop us from doing it again." For the first time, the queen smiled, not fully, but a small, fragile curve of her lips. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who had forgotten how. She motioned toward a smaller corridor. "Walk with me," she said. They walked through the halls of the ancient palace, corridors lined with murals of Zherkai victories and carvings of long-dead emperors. Alara's steps were heavy. "All of this," she said, gesturing at the walls, "was built on pride. We believed our claws were blessed by the stars. We never thought anyone could challenge us. And then humans came, small, weak, mortal, yet you fought until our gods went silent." Elias looked at the carvings. The proud faces of conquerors turned to dust. "Maybe your gods weren't silent," he said softly. "Maybe they were watching, waiting to see if you'd learn something from us." She stopped walking. "Learn from humans?" "From our mistakes," Elias said. "Because we've made plenty." The queen looked at him for a long time, her crest lowering slightly, a sign of humility in her kind. "You speak with honesty," she murmured. "Perhaps that is the first lesson." As they stood beneath the fading light, a cold breeze moved through the ruined palace. It carried the scent of dust and hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. For the first time in many years, Queen Alara did not feel like a ruler of corpses or a goddess of vengeance. She felt like a being who still had something left to learn, and Elias Carter, the simple human who had come to answer her questions, had unknowingly become her teacher. The days that followed were quiet ones. For the first time in many years, the palace of the Zherkai queen echoed not with orders or screams, but with questions. Queen Alara and the human Elias Carter, met each morning in the same hall, a vast room where sunlight filtered through shattered glass panels, painting patterns of gold and blue on the cracked floor. The guards no longer looked at the human with hatred. They looked at him with curiosity. This fragile creature who had once been their enemy now spoke with their queen as though they were equals. Alara questioned him endlessly. She asked about Earth, about its forests, oceans, and the small creatures that lived without fear. She asked about the human heart. What made it burn so fiercely? What made it destroy so easily? Elias answered patiently, his voice steady, his words soft and honest. Sometimes his answers hurt her more than silence ever could. "Do humans ever stop fighting?" she asked one morning. Elias smiled sadly. "We try. But peace is hard when we remember everything we've lost." The queen turned away, her claws brushing over the armrest of her broken throne. "Then perhaps we are not so different," she murmured. "My people remember too much. Every memory is a blade we hold to our own hearts." Alara had not slept much in weeks. When she did, her dreams were full of fire, the screams of her children, the fall of her empire, the burning skies. Each time she woke, she would touch her crown, the same one she wore during the war, and feel its weight pressing against her soul. It was a crown made of silver and obsidian, once a symbol of strength and power. Now it felt like a chain of guilt. That afternoon, Elias found her in her private chamber, standing before a tall mirror. The reflection that looked back at her was not the proud queen who once ruled stars, but a weary woman haunted by ghosts. "You keep looking at that crown," Elias said softly. Alara didn't look away from the mirror. "It is all I have left of who I was. A symbol of a throne that no longer matters." He stepped closer, his voice low but gentle. "Maybe it's time to let go of what was." Her golden eyes flashed for a moment, but there was no anger, only pain. "Let go?" she repeated. "If I let go, then what remains of my people? My crown is their memory, their pain, their pride." Elias looked at her reflection beside his own. Two broken figures from two broken worlds. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't honor the dead by carrying their pain. You honor them by learning how to live again." The queen turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You speak like a philosopher," she said quietly. "I'm not," he replied with a faint smile. "I'm just someone who's tired of ghosts." For a moment their eyes met, hers filled with fire, his with sorrow. And then something inside her broke. With trembling claws she reached up and removed her crown. The metal gleamed faintly under the dim light. She stared at it for a long time, as though seeing it for the first time. "This crown," she whispered, "was forged from the bones of our first conquerors. It has seen 1,000 victories, and one final defeat." She placed it gently on the table beside her. The sound it made, soft metal against stone, echoed through the room like a farewell. Elias said nothing. He only stood in silence, letting the moment breathe. After a while, Alara spoke again. "Do your people have something like this? A symbol that reminds them who they are?" Elias thought for a moment. "Maybe not one thing," he said. "But we have our scars, our graves, our stories. They remind us that we've survived, even when we shouldn't have." The queen looked at him thoughtfully. "Stories," she said. "My people had many, but none of them ended well." "Then maybe," Elias said softly, "it's time to write a new one." Alara closed her eyes. For the first time since the war, she let herself imagine something other than loss. She imagined her people rebuilding, not as conquerors, but as survivors. She imagined children laughing again, even if they would never be her own. The thought hurt, but it also healed just a little. That night, the queen stood on her balcony, watching the alien stars above her scarred world. The crown was gone from her head, and for the first time she didn't feel naked without it. She felt lighter. Elias joined her, silent as ever. The two stood side by side, not as enemies or ruler and servant, but as two beings bound by the same wound. The queen spoke softly, her voice trembling like the wind. "Perhaps you are right, Elias Carter. Perhaps peace does not come from power, but from the courage to start again." He nodded. "That's all peace really is, and starting again, even when it hurts." And beneath the shattered skies of a broken world, the queen of the Jerkai finally began to understand that true strength wasn't in the crown she wore, but in the heart that still dared to hope. The next day, the queen sent word for Elias to meet her outside the palace. It was rare for her to leave the safety of its ancient walls. But she said there was something he needed to see, something even she had avoided for too long. A small airship carried them across the ruined plains of her homeworld. The land below stretched endlessly, once filled with crystal forests and glowing lakes, now a wasteland of gray dust. The winds howled through empty valleys like the voices of the dead. Neither of them spoke for most of the journey. Alara sat near the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Elias watched her reflection in the glass, the proud lines of her face softened by sorrow. She was not the terrifying ruler he had imagined when he came here. She was a mother who had lost everything. After a long silence, Elias finally asked, "Where are we going, Your Majesty?" Her answer was quiet. "To the place where your people ended my world." Elias felt his chest tighten. He had seen war's ruins before, but there was something different in her tone, something deeper than anger. It was grief, cold and endless. When they landed, he understood. The ground was made of glass, black glass melted and hardened by the fire of human bombs. The air shimmered with faint energy, like ghosts still trapped in the light, and stretching for miles were small, crystal-like shapes scattered across the field. At first, Elias thought they were stones, but when he looked closer, he realized what they were. Bones, Jerkai bones, delicate, curved, and shining faintly blue in the sunlight. The remains of a people who had once believed themselves invincible. Queen Alara walked slowly through the field, her long cloak dragging behind her. She knelt beside a cluster of smaller bones and tiny, fragile ones. She touched them gently with her claws, her voice barely a whisper. "My children were here," she said. "They were hiding in the temple when your ships came. They thought the lights in the sky were stars. They didn't know." Her voice broke and she stopped speaking. The silence that followed was unbearable. Elias's knees felt weak. His hands shook as he looked at the ruins around him. He remembered the work he had done. Long nights fixing ship engines, checking targeting systems, never asking where the bombs would fall. He had told himself it was just a job, that he was too small to matter in a war so large. But standing here among the bones of the innocent, he understood the truth. Every small act had built the fire that burned this place. The queen turned toward him slowly, her eyes shining with tears that glowed faintly in the light. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice low and shaking. "Tell me why my children are gone. Tell me why your kind took everything from us." Elias couldn't breathe. The words stuck in his throat. For a moment he wished he could lie, wished he could offer some noble reason, strategy, survival, revenge, anything to make it easier. But there was no reason. Only choices made in fear. He stepped closer and knelt before her. His head bowed, his voice breaking. "There is no reason good enough," he said. "No excuse that can make this right. I built the ships that dropped those bombs. I didn't know this was one of the targets. But I was part of it. I'm sorry, Alara, I'm so deeply sorry." The queen stared at him. Her claws tightened against the ash, trembling with fury. But not at him. At everything. At the universe that had turned both their races into killers. "You did not order the attack," she said bitterly. "Why do you take the blame?" Elias raised his head. His eyes were wet but steady. "Because someone has to. Because if we all say it wasn't me, then nothing ever changes. Someone must answer, even if it hurts." The queen's breath trembled. For a moment she wanted to strike him, to scream, to make him feel even a fraction of her loss. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Guilt, not pride. Grief, not arrogance. He was not a soldier defending his race. He was a man standing in the ashes, accepting the weight of every life lost. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Do humans always suffer this way? For things they did not do?" Elias smiled faintly, though it was full of pain. "Yes, because that's how we learn to be better." For a long time, neither of them moved. The cold wind passed over them, carrying the sound of quiet, the kind of quiet that follows after truth. Finally, Queen Alara knelt beside him. Together they stayed there in the field of bones, the last queen of a fallen race and a single human worker, mourning not as enemies but as two beings who had finally seen each other's hearts. When they rose, Alara looked toward the horizon. "We cannot undo what was done," she said softly. "But perhaps we can make sure it never happens again." Elias nodded. "That's all I've ever wanted." As they left the field, the sunlight shifted, and for the first time in years, it touched the glassy ground with warmth instead of shadow. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of forgiveness. The journey back to the palace was silent. The airship hummed softly as it crossed the dark plains, carrying the weight of two hearts heavy with the same truth. Queen Alara sat by the window, her hands resting in her lap, claws still faintly stained with the ash of her children's resting place. Beside her, Elias Carter sat quietly, staring at the horizon that never seemed to end. Neither spoke. There were no words strong enough to hold the pain they had shared. When the ship landed, the Queen walked alone through the palace gates. The guards stepped aside, their eyes wide when they saw the expression on her face. Not rage, but something even more haunting. Grief mixed with thought. She went to the great hall and stood beneath the cracked ceiling. The light from above fell across the broken throne. She remembered the moment she first sat there, the cheers of her people echoing like thunder. She had once believed her rule was destiny. Now she knew it was burden. Elias followed her slowly, his boots quiet against the marble floor. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if he should speak. The Queen's shoulders were shaking slightly, but she did not cry. Finally, she asked in a low, trembling voice, "Do your people ever forgive?" Elias looked up. "Sometimes," he said softly. "But real forgiveness doesn't come fast. It comes after you understand the pain and accept that it will never truly go away." Alara turned, her golden eyes shimmering with tired anger. "And do you expect me to forgive?" He shook his head. "No, I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that not all humans hide from what they've done." The Queen's voice grew quiet. "You take responsibility for your kind's crimes. But why would you carry that burden? You are only one man." "Because," Elias said gently, "someone has to start. Maybe I can't fix the past, but I can stop the silence." Alara studied him for a long time. The words struck something deep inside her, something she had buried under layers of pride and pain. Her people had always taught her that weakness was shame, yet here stood a human, unarmed and frail, accepting guilt he did not personally cause, and somehow it looked stronger than any crown she had ever worn. She walked closer, her tall figure casting a long shadow over him. "You speak of pain as though it is your own," she said. Elias looked up. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It is. Because pain doesn't need blood ties to belong. It only needs a heart." The Queen's lips parted slightly, but no words came. She turned away again and slowly lowered herself onto the steps of her throne. Her crown sat beside her, cold and silent, a reminder of all she had lost. For a while there was only the sound of the wind moving through the cracks in the walls. Then softly she asked, "What do humans do after such loss?" Elias took a deep breath. "We rebuild," he said. "Sometimes out of anger, sometimes out of love. But we always rebuild, even when it hurts. That's what keeps us alive." The Queen nodded slowly, her claws tracing a faint line in the stone beside her. "My people do not know how to rebuild without war," she said. "Peace feels like emptiness to them. They look to me for strength, but all I have left is sorrow." Elias walked forward and knelt beside her. "Then show them something new," he said. "Show them that strength can come from mercy, too." Alara turned her head, meeting his eyes. "Mercy?" she repeated softly. "To forgive the ones who took everything from us?" "To forgive yourself," Elias said quietly. "You couldn't save them all, but you're still here. That means there's still something left to protect." Those words hit her harder than any blade. For a moment she stopped breathing. Her claws clenched and a single tear slipped down her cheek, glowing faintly as it fell to the ground. She whispered, "You carry so much guilt, human, and yet you still offer me hope." "Why?" Elias smiled weakly. "Because if we stop believing in hope, we stop being human. And maybe that's the only thing worth sharing with your people." The Queen looked down at him, at this small creature who carried more weight in his heart than an empire could bear. Slowly she rose from her seat and extended her clawed hand. Elias hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her hand was cold but steady. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "forgiveness is not something that must be given. Perhaps it is something we build, like peace." He nodded. "Yes, one stone at a time." The Queen stood tall again, looking toward the distant horizon beyond the palace walls. The setting sun painted the sky with red and gold, the colors of fire and rebirth. "I will not forget the dead," she said, "but maybe I will not hate the living either." And for the first time since the war ended, she let go of her anger. Not completely, but enough for the air around her to feel lighter. Elias bowed his head. "That's enough," he said softly. "That's how healing begins." The queen turned to him with a faint, fragile smile. "Then stay, human. Help me teach my people what it means to begin again." And in that moment, surrounded by the broken walls of a fallen empire, a single spark of forgiveness flickered, small, trembling, but bright enough to light the path toward something new. Days passed like whispers in the wind. The once roaring palace of Queen Alara had fallen quiet, its halls echoing only with the soft steps of her and the human who refused to leave. The war was over, but the silence it left behind was louder than any explosion. Elias Carter spent his days walking through the gardens that had turned into wastelands. He picked up broken stones, replanted what he could, and cleared the ash with his bare hands. The aliens who passed by stared at him, some with confusion, others with hate. But he never looked away. He smiled, bowed his head, and kept working. At first, no one dared to speak to him. He was the symbol of everything they had lost, the face of humanity, the invader, the destroyer. Yet every morning when the first light touched the ruins, they saw him kneeling in the dirt, planting life again. Slowly, their anger began to turn into questions. One morning, as Elias was fixing a shattered fountain, a young alien child approached him. Her eyes were a soft silver, her voice trembling as she asked, "Why are you helping us? You are human." Elias looked up, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Because helping you helps me too," he said simply. "When I build something, I feel like I'm fixing a piece of the world my people broke." The child blinked, unsure what to say. Then she whispered, "My brother said humans don't care about us." Elias smiled sadly. "Then maybe your brother hasn't met the right one yet." The queen had been watching from the balcony above. She saw the way her people looked at the human, with suspicion at first, then curiosity, and slowly, a faint spark of respect. It made her wonder, could peace truly begin with a single man? Later that day, she called Elias to the throne room. He entered, his clothes dusty, his hands scarred from work. He bowed deeply. "You humble yourself before my people," she said softly. "Why?" Elias looked up, his voice calm. "Because pride built the war. Humility might build the peace." The queen stared at him, silent for a long moment. "You speak like a leader," she said. He shook his head. "No, I just speak like someone who's tired of hate." Something in his words made her chest ache. She turned away and looked toward the cracked glass walls that once glimmered with victory. "Do you think they will ever forgive us?" she asked. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Your Majesty. It's about choosing not to let pain decide every tomorrow." Those words lingered in her mind long after he left the hall. That night, the queen went to the memorial of her lost people, a field of crystal stones glowing faintly under the moon. She knelt there, placing her palm on one of the stones. For the first time, she spoke to the dead, not with vengeance, but with honesty. "My children," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I failed to protect you from hate, but maybe I can protect what you loved, our home, our future." Her tears fell on the stones, shimmering like drops of light. And though the night was cold, she felt something warm in her chest, a strange, fragile peace. The next morning, she summoned her council. They looked at her with disbelief when she said, "The human will stay. He will help rebuild the capital." Gasps filled the room. One advisor, old and bitter, shouted, "Your Majesty." "He is one of them. He has no place among us." The queen's voice was calm but sharp. "Then perhaps it is time we learn that mercy has a place in our world. If we cannot forgive one man who tries to help, then we are no better than the monsters we fear." Her words silenced the hall. For the first time in generations, the queen spoke not as a ruler of conquest, but as a mother, as a soul seeking healing. Over the next weeks, the palace changed. Gardens grew again, rivers ran clear, and the people began to rebuild side by side, alien and human. The air was still heavy with memories, but it no longer carried the stench of hate. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Elias stood beside Queen Alara, overlooking the city. The rooftops glowed gold in the fading light, and laughter echoed faintly from below, children's laughter. "It's strange," Alara said softly. "I used to think peace was weakness." Elias smiled. "Peace isn't the absence of power," he said. "It's what gives power meaning." The queen looked at him, her eyes soft for the first time in years. You speak as if you've known loss greater than mine, he sighed. Loss doesn't compete, Your Majesty. It only connects us. They stood together in silence, watching the horizon. The wind carried the scent of fresh soil, a scent of beginnings, and in that quiet moment something remarkable happened. The queen of a broken world and the man who once represented its destroyers stood side by side, not as enemies but as survivors, bound by the shared truth that peace is not born in victory, but in understanding it was not the end of their journey, but it was, at last, the true beginning of healing. Months passed. The ruins of a war-torn empire slowly began to breathe again. Cracked walls were mended, dead fields grew green, and among the sound of tools and laughter, a strange sight became common, humans and aliens working side by side. At the center of it all stood Queen Alera, tall and graceful, her presence no longer heavy with anger but filled with quiet strength. By her side walked Elias Carter, the human who had once been her prisoner and now had become something far more important, her bridge to hope. The people no longer whispered with fear when they saw him. Children smiled when he passed, and elders nodded in respect. There were still wounds that time could not erase, but something greater was growing. Trust. One evening, the queen called for Elias to meet her at the top of the rebuilt tower. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh rain. From there, they could see the whole city glowing with light, a sign of rebirth. You've changed them, she said softly as he approached. Elias shook his head. No, Your Majesty. They changed themselves. I just reminded them what they were capable of. She looked at him, her golden eyes reflecting the stars. And what about you? Have you found what you were looking for? He smiled faintly. Maybe. I thought I came here to take responsibility for my kind's sins, but I think I found something else. Forgiveness. From you, from your people, maybe even from myself. The queen stepped closer. Forgiveness, she repeated quietly. It sounds like such a small word, yet it carries the weight of worlds. Elias looked at the glowing horizon. Maybe that's why it matters. Because it's not about power or pride. It's about choosing to try again. For a moment, they stood in silence. The night wind brushed past them, and somewhere below, bells rang. Soft, melodic, peaceful. The queen's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. Do you ever miss your home? Elias nodded slowly. Every day. But home isn't just a place, Your Majesty. Sometimes it's the people who still believe in you even after everything. Alera turned to face him. And do you believe in me? She asked. Elias looked up at her, his expression gentle. I do. You carry pain like a crown, but you wear it with grace. You gave your people a chance to heal, even when it hurt you the most. That takes more courage than any war ever did. The queen looked away, her throat tightening. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a ruler, but as a person. She took a deep breath. When I first met you, I saw only the face of my enemy. Now I see something else, a reflection of what we could become. Elias smiled. Then maybe that's what peace really is. Seeing yourself in someone you once hated. They stood there together for a long time, watching the stars rise. The galaxy stretched before them, vast, endless, full of stories not yet written. Then the queen said, There will be more challenges ahead. My people still mourn. Some still hate. Peace is fragile, Elias nodded. It always is. But fragile things are often the most beautiful. The queen looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. You speak like a poet, human. He laughed quietly. No, Your Majesty. I just speak like someone who's finally learned what matters. The wind grew stronger, lifting the edge of her royal robe. She took a slow breath, then extended her hand toward him. Then promise me something, Elias Carter, she said softly. Promise me that even if the stars themselves turn cold, humanity will not forget this. That you came here not as a conqueror, but as a healer. Elias bowed his head and took her hand gently. I promise, he said. I'll make sure our kind remembers this day, the day we chose compassion over pride. The queen's eyes softened. And I will make sure mine remember that not all humans bring destruction. Some bring light. For a brief moment they stood hand in hand, the queen of a once broken world and the human who carried the burden of his species. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if the universe itself bore witness to their vow. Far below in the streets, the sounds of rebuilding continued. Hammers struck. Voices sang. Children laughed. Life had returned to a world that once knew only war. Elias looked at the horizon and said quietly, "Maybe this is how we begin again. Not by erasing the past, but by learning from it." The Queen nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "and by believing that even in the darkest of hearts there is still light waiting to be found." The night sky glowed silver as dawn began to rise. The first rays of sunlight touched the city, turning the broken towers into gold. The Queen and the human stood there side by side as a new day began, no longer enemies, no longer divided, but two souls, bound by forgiveness, courage, and the fragile, powerful promise of peace.